Welcome to the live stream Q&A. If you have any writing or storytelling questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. If you don't have any questions, that's fine too. Hang around, listen in. We'll answer some fun questions hopefully for you. How do you drop hints for future plot points in your story? That depends on what plot point you're trying to hint. Like, let's say, for example, that your hero fights as part of a rebellion. They are part of this rebellion. And the main focus of the conflict right now is just rebelling against the empire, if you will, or the party in power. But then in that section, while the main character is fighting within this rebellion, maybe there's a character who's higher up in the rebellion who makes some really dark, challenging choices and even like says and does things that the main character doesn't agree with. What's happening there is you're creating tension, which is great, but that could also be good groundwork then for later when that character, as the rebellion succeeds against the Empire, when that character pushes forward and seizes control and becomes almost like a new emperor, a new challenge to overcome, and the main character has to overcome that. And so that's what you can do is you can kind of project future conflict by starting the conflict on a smaller scale earlier in the story. Any tips on writing stories for games? If you're going to write a story for a game, you shouldn't write the story completely separate from the development of the game mechanics. The game mechanics themselves should help reinforce the themes and the purpose of the work. So an example of this not going quite right is BioShock. Well, the series in general is very well lauded, and the original BioShock game is very well lauded as well, but it kind of also led to an advancement in the criticism and analysis of video game storytelling, and they created this term called ludonarrative dissonance. And what this is in the original BioShock, I'm trying to remember the exact phrasing of how this goes, but basically the story, narrative-wise, is about tearing down this Ayn Randian capitalist mindset in the story, but the actual game mechanics did not help you do so per se. And in fact, the actions you take kind of reflect such a world. And so there's a distance between what the character was being asked to do and what the story was ultimately about. And that created what they refer to as a ludonarrative dissonance. I don't know why they call it that, but that is the term. And that is not ideal. And so for stories, ask yourself, I would recommend to work with whoever's developing the game mechanics and look for ways for the mechanics of the story to feed into the narrative, and for the narrative to feed into the mechanics of the mechanics of the gameplay. And when you combine those two together, then you're suddenly using all the tools of the story to explore this thing. And to equate it, if it helps to have an analogy or a more literature-focused comparison. Let's see if I can remember it, but I recently read the Mistborn trilogy by Brendan Sanderson, and I would say I like the series overall. It's a lot of fun. If you guys, his fight scenes are fantastic. His magic system is engaging and well thought out. It's worth a read. It's a great series. But I would say there's ludonarrative dissonance in that the themes explored within the characters and what they think about and talk about and the inner journeys they go on is largely divorced from the actual events of the story. And so there's a little bit of a dissonance there. Like, there's lots of themes contemplating identity, faith, God, morality. And while the story talks about those things in the characters' heads, the actual events of the story don't really help explore that very well. In fact, the ending, which I'm not going to spoil for anyone, but the character who's primarily focused on a journey of faith, yeah, I'm not going to say what happens, but it definitely, his conclusion does not make any sense for someone on a journey of faith. Let's just say that. What do you think about non-chronological writing? If you mean writing a story out of order in terms of process, like, for example, you decide to write not the beginning first, but you write like scene 5 first, and then you write maybe scene 7 because it excites you, or then you go back to write scene 1. To me, it sounds like an absolute nightmare. That's not how my process works. But if that's a better way for you to engage with your story, if that keeps it engaging for you and helps you get stories down, especially on a first draft, that's a totally fine way to do it. The only thing you want to keep in mind is there are challenges and limitations to approaching it that way. For example, like when I write, I like to go chronologically because my characters kind of build and grow with the story as I go, and I don't plan everything. And so the chronology is very important to me. Likewise, if you're jumping around a lot, your character might be a little inconsistent in that first draft. Now, does that mean you shouldn't do it? No, it just means in your second draft, you're going to have to pay attention to that particular issue and then do a lot of smoothing in that respect. I feel like whatever ideas I come up with have either been done or just based off something I've seen. That's a very common thing to experience, and to an extent, it's true. Like, there is no true originality in the world. If you want to really see this explained really well, watch Kirby Ferguson's Everything is a Remix. It's a video series that I think is on YouTube now, but also is on his website, Kirby Ferguson's Everything is a Remix. And it explains how what we perceive as originality is really just taking pre-existing things from different places and remixing them together in a fresh way. And so when you are looking at your own ideas and you think, oh, this has been done before and this has been done before, odds are it has been in some shape or form. But if you want to get better at making it feel more original or even see opportunities for originality in your work, try to take inspiration from multiple disparate places. Try to bring inspirations from genres that haven't been combined or different types of characters from another type. For example, an example I hear often that's really good is like you look at superhero movies. They have the superhero genre, and a lot of new life has been breathed into those genres when you look at movies like Logan, which is more like a Western than a superhero movie, but it's because it's taking elements from elsewhere, mixing them into something kind of fresh and new. And so that's what you can do to really combat that feeling that what you're doing is overdone or been done before, is kind of one, embracing, yes, every piece of what you do has been done before, but you can pursue originality by combining them in unique ways within your story. And so if you have your story and you feel like it is too repetitive or derivative of pre-existing works, try to find new inspirations to bring in that kind of break that mold a little bit, and then you'll get a lot of freshness in your story. I have trouble writing what characters are thinking. My background is film. Any suggestions? I would say my advice for a lot of these things is make sure you're looking at like books and like studying how those writers are conveying thoughts and emulate how those writers are showing thoughts. Because I can give you advice, but what's really going to help you is when you actually look at what other writers are doing and then like literally try and copy the approach. But other advice I can give you in terms of character thoughts, I can maybe equip you with. Well, first of all, the thoughts you share of your characters should be things that you can't show effectively in your story, or there's no time to show it, and it's just more efficient and clear and better to just tell the thoughts of the characters. But then on top of that, there's like 3 different ways you can convey character thoughts. First, so the three ways are called direct discourse, indirect discourse, and free indirect discourse. Direct discourse is when you kind of quote the character's thoughts and you say something like, Jamie threw himself on the bed and thought, what have I done to deserve this? And you put those thoughts in quotes, italics, or you don't have to do any of that. But like that phrasing is like we're giving the verbatim quote of the thoughts. So that's one way you can do it. Second way, indirect discourse is when you say something like, Jamie threw himself on the bed and wondered what he'd done to deserve this. So we have wondered what he'd done to deserve this. So we're not getting the exact quote. We're giving the gist of what Jamie is thinking. And so that's free. That's indirect discourse. And the third one is free indirect discourse, where you kind of blend exposition and perspective together. So it's Jamie threw himself onto the bed. What had he done to deserve this? And you see how we're kind of blending there. This it's a little bit of cross between third person and first person, because the first person voice, the thoughts, the feelings of Jamie are blending into the exposition. What had he done to deserve this? Because that's not the objective narrator speaking. That is the character's thoughts and phrasings bleeding into the exposition. So those are 3 different ways that you can convey character thoughts. So hopefully that will help. But again, I do encourage you also to grab books off the shelves and look really closely at how and when writers are sharing the thoughts of their characters and emulate it. Do you think that advice for writing books can be applied to movies and or TV shows? Definitely. Not everything, but definitely parts of it. Because the thing is, there are different mediums. So there are some medium-specific things that will not cross over. It's why if you want to write books, you should read books. Or if you want to make movies, you should watch movies for sure. And you can mix and match mediums as well. But there's definitely always going to be some things that only work within the medium. A lot of the stuff I talk about here, I think a lot of people's questions tend to be broader. So a lot of those can transfer over. But the big difference, obviously, is movies and shows are a lot more visual by necessity. Books can give character thoughts more. You can play with time maybe a little bit more. There's different tools at your disposal. Is it okay for a side character or villain to be more interesting than the main character? Technically, yes, as long as it's still entertaining enough for people. But I think I think it's a matter of degree. So, for example, if your main character is boring and your side character is just fascinating and fun and engaging and people really prefer them, then there's maybe an imbalance where you should be like, well, why is my main character so boring? What can I do to make their struggle more relatable? And so then you should up it. If it's like a slight discrepancy, I don't think it's a big deal. I think the big problem is when your readers don't care about the main character but they do care a lot about the side character or villain. So that's the bigger problem. If there is a slight discrepancy though, like as long as they like the main character, even if they like other characters more, if they're still enjoying the story, that's totally fine. What do you do with parents? My protagonist has parents, of course, but I don't know what to do with them. If you're talking about YA in particular, this is, I think, a common reason why YA and children's literature will often have the parents die or be killed off before the story begins or even during it, because often they don't want to have to worry about the parents as like taking up space in the narrative and they just want to focus on the kids. So that's something some people do. But otherwise, though, if you do want to include the parents, which I think is good, because just killing off all the parents and all of children's literature and YA literature, or literature in general, is kind of a weird thing to do. One thing you can do is make them integral to the progression of the plot. Maybe they're a barrier for your protagonist. Maybe they are an important support system for your protagonist. Maybe they are in danger and your protagonist has to help save them or whatever. But if you can incorporate them into the plot, that can be a really good way to make use of the parents. But truthfully, if they're not a huge part of the story, and there is no way to incorporate them, a character can also have parents and have them be kind of in the background and kind of be forgotten even. Like if they're children, you'll want a nod to like the parents, but yeah, it depends on the story you're trying to tell. I meant didn't exercise any romantic, intimate relationships. Can I write about that? I'm not 100% sure what you're asking. If you're asking, can you write about intimate romantic relationships when you haven't been in a romantic relationship, you absolutely can do it. I would just say, read other stories by people who have been, talk to people who have been, get insight into it so you can portray it well, and also get reader feedback from people who've been in a relationship, because they can tell you where you've potentially gone wrong. Because like I didn't date anybody until I was a junior in college. Well, no, technically freshman year of college, there was kind of a thing. But anyway, I didn't do a lot of dating, and it definitely showed in some of my things, but there are people in my workshop who pointed out, and I adjusted accordingly. Reader feedback is wonderful that way. They can help. How do I turn my brain off while writing the first draft? So basically, I think what you're asking is like, how do I stop overanalyzing what I'm writing? How do I stop editing as I go? And part of it is accepting that the purpose of a first draft is just to get a first draft down and to keep moving forward and not to keep looking backwards. Like for me, I will often, here's how my writing sessions usually start. I sit down to write. I put on, lately I've been doing kind of those YouTube ambiance videos where they, it's got a really serene, like cozy cottage or something at night with rain falling, and it's got nice sounds. And I put that on the side on one of my monitors, and it just kind of sets the mood. And then I take about 5 minutes to edit, so like the last few paragraphs of what I wrote before, because I want to gain a little momentum, kind of ease my way in. And then I just write forward, and I don't really do much editing backwards. I just kind of just keep moving forward. And my goal is like, well, the purpose here is to move forward. So I'm focused more on just like what's happening next rather than what's happening behind me, or what has just been done. And I don't like look at the phrasings that much, because the point isn't to have the phrasing down. The point is to polish later drafts. So I think really just over time getting comfortable focusing on the goal of progress rather than the idea of like finalizing and polishing. It also really helps. I think a lot of our obsession with polishing as we go and overthinking what we've just written comes from a belief in our minds that if what we're doing is not perfect, that no progress can be made, or that whatever came before is imperfect, that reflects poorly upon me as a writer. Like we see that poorly phrased sentence offends me, and like that doesn't reflect me as a writer. No, I know I can make that sentence better, and so you're tempted to prove to yourself that that's what you can do, and to prove to yourself that you're a good writer. And I think the more comfortable you get with the fact that a messy first draft does not make you a bad writer. If you watch my most recent TikTok video, it's kind of what I briefly touch on. You writing a messy first draft does not make you a bad writer, and I want you to know this. I want to make this clear to you. You're not a bad writer if your first draft is messy. that sentence you just wrote that's messy, that does not make you a bad writer. You don't need to prove to anyone or to yourself any differently. You can just keep writing forward because no one else is going to see this rough draft. This is just for you. You're just getting it down. You'll polish it later. And you get more comfortable with that the more you embrace that and the more you write. Like, because I write for a marketing agency, so I do a lot of drafting. And the terrible things I write, like just the terrible writing, but I don't look at it and get obsessed over it. I don't look at it and feel ashamed, because the purpose is just to get ideas out, to let them flow and see what's working, see what's not working. And it is doing exactly what I want it to do in that moment. And so I'm not ashamed of it. And you shouldn't be either. Your first draft is doing what you want it to do. You've done nothing wrong. All right, everybody, thank you so much for coming to this live stream Q&A. Thank you for all the questions. I'll be doing this again next week at 2 p.m. Central Time. Be sure to bring some more, and I hope to see you all next week. Thank you all so much. Have a good week.